Okay, and welcome to week 11 of this wonderful venture that we call the graphics and animation class. And today, this one is especially for those students that we have that are in the CIT major. I'm not saying that communication majors won't find this interesting, but I will say that the CIT people should find this particularly interesting because it's really right down your alley. And that's because we're going to talk about multimedia. And the reason why that's important is because you guys are into programming, and a lot of what you're going to be doing has to do with multimedia, video games, things like that. And this is the perfect place to kind of dovetail what we're talking about here. So let's get right into it. Okay, Multimedia Object Workflow. And as you remember, we're going to I know it's kind of boring, but we're going to do this every single time from now on for the duration of this project. And that is, we're talking about the objects assignment. Now, remember, the objects assignment, you have to do 4, but you have 5 possibilities. Now, the first possibility we discussed was the 3D printer. The second was the animated logo, television logo, that sort of thing. And last week we talked about print as in paper, and we produced a nice little letterhead. Now this week we're going to bring in multimedia, which is different. And so it's more akin to the TV logo, but at the same time, it really isn't. We're going to talk about why there's a big difference. Okay, so once again, the 3D printer workflow, it's important that we keep reviewing these things because I want it fresh in your mind. Basically, you're using Modeler. You're creating a 3D object within Modeler. You're exporting it as a single layer as an STL file. So you've got one layer in your Modeler program. Even if you started out with many, or you got one layer per part, anything that you want to print has to be in one layer. You export that as an STL file. The MakerBot desktop accepts the file, and then you can go ahead and do your final sizing, your preview, and your print. The 3D printer is now fully operational, and the computer in that corner workstation is operational as well, so you can use that to finalize anything you want to do. You can even do it all in there. Okay, now the print logo workflow. We basically start out in Modeler once again. We're making the 3D objects that are necessary. We go into the layout program and we arrange the objects, lights, cameras, and not animation in this case. And we export a signal frame, no animation, at high resolution. And then Photoshop might be an optional step where you can tweak the image. And finally, you bring it into InDesign. And InDesign is where you create your layout on paper and export to PDF. And from there, you go into Acrobat and you print out on paper, or you take it down to Office Max, wherever it is, depending on what you're doing. Now, the TV logo, we sort of switch those because I want to make sure that we compare these carefully. The Modeler program creates your 3D objects, just like it does in the other programs. Your layout program, you arrange the objects, lights, cameras, and there you do animation. You export as still frames in the PNG format. Then you take those into Premiere, which accepts the frames, and you export as an H.264 MPEG movie. Now the multimedia workflow in direct comparison. Once again, same thing. Modeler, 3D objects. Layout program, arrange, lights, cameras, and to an extent animation. In fact, it could be animation. But the animation is going to be defined differently. And sort of to give you an idea, you don't have to do 30 frames a second. In fact, you rarely do. Some animations are 18 frames a second in multimedia. And some animations aren't really animations in the strictest sense. They are animations that only have 2 or 3 frames. And we'll talk about why that's important. But you're still typically exporting PNG files. And then, instead of going into Premiere, not to say that Premiere can't be involved at all, but instead of going into Premiere, most likely, you're going into either Dreamweaver if you're doing a web page design, or Adobe Animate, or something like that if you're working in multimedia. And so that will create objects for the timelines that exist in there. Now the final product will be as a multimedia file Now, it used to be a SWF file, the SWF file for Flash. And I say used to be because they're phasing that out. They're not letting us do that anymore. And I'm sad to see it go, because the SWF file was a good way to create a nice self-contained multimedia object. But there's still JavaScript. There's still other ways that you can do this, and that's more your area than mine. Okay, multimedia objects. What can happen with multimedia objects? You could make a game element. Let's say you're doing a graphic game. You can create objects for that game. And whatever program you're using, I guarantee you'll find a way to incorporate 3D graphics in there. You could do a cell phone app. You could do a website button or banner. So if you have an animated button, that's a great place to do it. You can have an illustration or an interactive map. Anything that's interactive could be created using this process. You could create the skin of an element. Skin or element of skin. Okay, so the idea is, let's say you've got an animation that the user can decide what they want to do with it. Or let's say you've got a whole website and you've got all of the programming that makes the website work. But let's say somebody else wants to use exactly the same programming, but they have a different product to sell. That's easy. All you do is take all the graphics and change them. And the text as well, of course. And so the actual coding can remain the same. So you're using the same programming, but you're putting a different skin on it. And of course, you can do this to enhance a PowerPoint presentation or many other things along those lines. Or you can do some sort of a simple animation that's interactive that has to do with logo engineering or something like that. I wanted to mention a very obvious one, and that would be your cell phone. Now, this is one of the reasons why I'm talking to the CIT people, is that this is important. This is the new normal. I hate to use that term because it's overused. But let's put it this way. There was a time when our communication people were over here, our CIT people were over here, you were programming computers, we were putting things on television. Gradually, these camps have merged. And so now, we no longer have televisions. We really don't. I mean, if you look at what television was in 1939 when it was first invented, it isn't anymore. Now every television you see is a computer. And every computer you see plays television. So really there's very little difference. And now suddenly we've got all this stuff. And so what this is something between a computer and a television. It's basically both and neither at the same time. And so now suddenly we have, this is a device. And then there's other devices that are on your wrist. Eventually you're going to have virtual reality devices. You're going to have contact lens devices. And so every device that you can think of is going to use some kind of graphics. That's where you come in, because that's exactly what this is for. And so because they're merging, we also have this situation now where everything on your cell phone, their computer pretty much kind of shares it. I'm not sure I agree with that, but it is what it is. And so what I'm going to demonstrate is how you could create a cell phone app. And so I'm going to show you, if I go over here, this is the cell phone. This is this. And so everything that shows up here shows up there. Isn't that something? Okay, so if I go way over here somewhere, I have this little thing that's a little green thing called swipe test. I never actually created an icon for it. So then if I click on swipe test, let's see what happens. Suddenly, I have an app that I created using graphics that you would find in 3D, the Lightwave 3D program. And so, for some reason, when I tried to do it so that it would respond to the swipe command, because I probably wasn't using the best program to do this, it just didn't work. Now, the swipe command might apply to some other things here, but if I hit the little down arrow, I can go through all of the books that I produced. And so I have them kind of scrolling by, and of course, you guys can laugh at my my programming here, because I'm sure you can do it better. But in any case, if I go to the right, then I have this other video, and I have the ability to play a trailer. If I click on that, that's animation. That takes me to YouTube. And let's see if I can turn it down a little bit while it's going. And I wonder if it'll respond if I... Yeah, there it is. All right, so if I'm holding it sideways, it plays it sideways. Now this is a 3D animation that was all done in Lightwave. And I may even have demonstrated it to you at some other point. And so it's a relatively short animation, all done using 3D graphics created in Lightwave. So those are all 3D models and so forth. All right, so, and all right, it's only got a few seconds to go yet. But the point is, this is on the cell phone. This is no longer on the computer. This is on the cell phone. And so then, okay, good. So I'm going to bring it back to here. If I hit the back button, there I am. I also, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, let's say that I want someone to be able to buy the books. So if I click on the first one, look what happens. Wow. Wow. We go to Amazon. How about that? There we go. And now you even see the new cover of the book. And just to prove to you that this works, I will go to the third book, which is the very last project. Again, it goes to Amazon, where you can make the purchase. Okay, so, all right, so the question is, what have I created here that is of any particular use? The answer is, in this particular case, not much. Meaning that I would dearly love every potential buyer of my books to have that app on their phone so that they can buy them just with a little, tapping a little picture. But I don't think I'm going to be able to convince people to download that app just for the sake of buying my books. Now, eventually I could. I'm sure Stephen King could do that. But really what I did by doing that was to educate myself, at least peripherally, on the process. And that's what I want you to understand that we can do. But the first thing I want to be able to do is to talk about how you can make elements within the program that allow you to do simple animations in the multimedia context. And so we're not going to be focusing on conventional animation or cell animation, meaning that if we have a movie you want to play, there it is. You got the movie, but we're not going to make a movie for multimedia purposes. Although one thing I will say about that is the first thing to understand is that the movie does not have to be horizontal. You can make it really any size you want because your Lightwave project, you can establish the aspect ratio any way it needs to be. You can have a tall, thin movie. You can have a short, wide movie, whatever it is that you need to do to fit on the screen. And so you can literally carve the viewer's experience up into little segments that fill up the screen. And that is how website applications work. That is how the old Flash-based websites used to work. And so I want to leave that on the table because it's important to understand. So what I want to show you how to do is probably the most simple thing you can do to make this work, and that is to create an animated button. Okay, so let's talk about this. We want to make an animated button. We want to make a button that responds when you pass your mouse over it, and you want to make a button that looks different when you're pushing on it than when you're not pushing on it. And so a button can look like anything. So let's design a button that we want. So we'll start with let's start with something like a toroid shape, because I don't usually do that. And if I just give it the variety it has here, I get this. And for my purposes, I'm going to say that that this is fine because I can sort of massage it as I go along. And so if you look, I'll move myself here a little bit off screen. So if you look here, you can see this toroid shape. It's a donut. And so that's going to be the ring of the button, the ring. So it's like if you have a button, there's a hole and there's some sort of a device that you press to make the button work. And so this will be the base piece. And it doesn't even have to be perfect. So that's going to be in one layer. Now the second layer, I'm going to call up the first in the background, and I'm going to make I'll make a capsule, because again, I don't usually do that. And if I draw the capsule here, I can make it nice and big. And you could do the same thing if you were doing a sphere or a disc, but this happens to be the easiest way to do it. And so if we were to put both of these layers online, you will see that from one perspective at least, you've got a button. Let's say you ignore everything behind there, and this piece can move in and out so that it's being pushed. And so that is fine. That is all we're going to do. It's not going to take very long. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the first layer. I'm going to go into polygon mode, and I'm going to select all these polygons. I'm going to go into change surface, and I'm going to call this ring, just like that. Then I'm going to go into the second layer. Same thing, just select all these polygons, and I'm going to call this button. And of course that word's going to come up a lot. Then I'm going to save this object. And I'm going to call the whole object button. We'll just call this button project. And so then, if I take this into the layout, if I do file, load, object, there's the button project, and you can see we have something that at least initially is not very useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into something of some kind of value. Now right now, if you look down here, there's only 2 layers. Now if I wanted to, I could go back and name the layers, but since I'm only using 2, I'm going to be incredibly lazy and just remember that the ring is on layer 1 and the button itself is on layer 2. There's a lot to this sort of thing, but it is not happening in modeling. Modeling is actually easy if you're doing it this way. But what I am going to do is I'm going to orient this differently, because right now this doesn't look like a button. So if I go to this little control here, which again gives me access to the layers, and I make sure that both layers are selected, I'm going to rotate. I'm going to rotate both those layers using the green control, and I'm going to rotate them by 90 degrees. Now I could choose to have it off center, but I would rather do that with the camera. I don't want to have to worry about the object fighting with me if I don't like the way something turned out. So then, if I look at the camera, just go to camera view, this is what the camera sees. And so this is exactly what your user would see if they're looking at the button. Now, believe it or not, this view may be what you want. It may be that this is exactly how you want to do it. You may want to look at it head on. But I'm going to go a little bit off. And so if I'm on my camera, I select camera down here, and I know move is selected. So first of all, I will come in on it a little bit, but I could also go a little bit off center, maybe a little bit down. And that may actually work. So if I'm going to do it that way, maybe come up just a little bit. So this shows you some of the dynamics here. Next thing I'm going to do, because obviously it looks completely horrendous at this point, is I'm going to, well, first of all, save the scene, save scene, and I'll put that in the current week. I'm going to call this button animation, and I'm going to go to my surface editor, and under the surface editor you will see that there are 2 layers, of course, and we're going to start with the ring. And this here, we're wide open. We're not going to bother putting any really fancy surfaces on it because we could, but let's say we want kind of like a goldy colored ring. So turn on the smoothing, get rid of that, that blocky look, and turn on the specularity and the glossiness, give it kind of a nice look there. And if I put on VPR, we can see. So the glossiness will give you kind of a metallic appearance. And we can have it reflect a little bit, so it's going to reflect the button itself, which might become useful. In fact, I'm going to turn the reflection all the way up. You'll see later where that may make a difference. And I could mess with the transparency, but not now. So if I go to the button itself, what color do we want this button to be? After I turn on smoothing, of course. A color could be any color you want. So that's where it becomes interesting. I say, why don't we keep this button blue? So I make a blue button, and I'm going to go for, turn up the specularity so that it has, in fact, we could make it a shiny button. We could give that glossiness, you know, that kind of a glass look. And we could have it reflect a little bit the ring. So we can do anything that we would normally do. We could even make it double-sided and put some transparency in there so we can see something else going on. So if you wanted to create like a lens effect, we could do that, but I'm not. So we'll keep it opaque, but that will be the up state of the button. So in other words, all things being equal, that's what the button looks like. Now, when you push the button, it will change. But let's say that we want to create a warning state so that if you pass the mouse over the button, it will light up. We can do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we will export what we have now. Now we've got some wasted space here. So if we wanted to work on that a little bit, we could. Meaning that we could take our camera and rotate it a little bit. So we could do that. And then we could move it in just a little bit more. We don't really have to do much more than that. And if we wanted to, we could make the whole thing square by going to the camera properties and making it 640 by 640. Or, you know, believe it or not, I'm not going to change this. I'm going to leave it around 640 because a button is not a very large thing. So if we have a 640 square button, that's what it would be. And so then, all I'm going to do is hit the F9 button. And so there is my button. And believe it or not, that's probably way too big. So what I'm going to do is instead, if you ever see a button that big on a website, no, of course not. So I'm actually going to go back into properties, and I'm going to make that 200 by 200. So that won't change our view here, but if I hit F9, that will be our button. And I'm actually okay with that, meaning that if I were going to have a button, that's the largest possible button I would have, but I can actually make it small later without losing a whole lot of bandwidth. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to save that as PNG32 because I want to make sure I keep that alpha channel because I don't want that black to be part of the image. And so if I go into week 11 here, and I'm going to call this button underscore up. So this would be the button not pushed. And that's it. So then, if I go to Surface Editor, all I'd have to do, if I just want to light it up, I can just take the luminosity up. So now, the button is glowing. And so then, function F9, or F9, and hit continue. And if I say save RGB, PNG32, and there's button up, I'm going to call this button over. And that's basically it. Now, if we're just doing web page design, that would probably be enough. But let's take it just a little bit further than that. So let's say that you push your mouse over it, it's glowing. If you actually press it, it changes color. So we'll go to a different color. Let's say it turns red when you do that. And that might be enough. But we could even, since we're doing 3D, we could go further than that. If I go to my perspective view, turn off VPR. And what I can do, so there's the camera. I could take my object there, and I could move it back. So if I go back to camera view, it's pressed. And so then if I were to hit F9 again, continue, save RGB 32, and that becomes button down. And so that is a simple animation. Okay, so here I am in Dreamweaver, which is also an Adobe product. So if you have the Adobe suite of products, you have this one as well. And Dreamweaver is not necessarily everybody's favorite program because people don't do a lot of web page design anymore, at least not at the code level. But I want to show you that it's not impossible, and it is possible to take advantage of things like this in the code level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a new page. And I'm going to make a new HTML page. We'll just keep it remarkably simple. Because if you make a page using HTML, what you're going to find is it takes virtually no bandwidth. It loads basically instantly. And you have an amazing amount of control over it. So if you're looking at any web page you would see on the internet, this is what it has to start out with. Just these 10 lines of code. Not even this. Most of this stuff is even unnecessary. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because if you want to make your own web page without all the bells and whistles, this is so easy, it's incredible. And you can always add the bells and whistles later. So right now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a title. I'm just going to call this button demonstration. And what the heck, I'll capitalize button. And so if you look at the code, those of you who don't know HTML code, these things within the angle brackets are called tags. HTML is the first tag that opens. HTML with a sort of backslash before it closes it. And so everything that's within HTML, everything that's within the code starts there, ends there. The header tag, that's the stuff you don't see on the website, including the title. That's what shows up on the title bar. So that starts there, ends there. And then the only other element that we care about is the body. And that is what you do see on the website. And so I'm just going to type the word, hello, this is my first web page. And so if I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I'm going to save this with the other projects. And I'm going to call this button underscore page. And if I save that, then you might think, well, what happened there? So we got a button page now. Well, let me show you what we can do with that. So if we're here in week 11, we have our button over, button up, and button down. But we also have this, which is right now it's calling itself a Firefox file. It could be any other browser file. If I right-hand click on that and I go to Open With, I get to pick my browser. And I don't really care which one it is, but I'll use Firefox to see what happens. And what I get is a completely blank web page, except for what I just wrote, hello, this is my first web page, and the label up here, which says button demonstration, which is what showed up in the title bar. So then, if I go back here into Dreamweaver, and I'm there, and I'll do a simple line break, BR, and that'll take me down, because otherwise it'll just keep going on that line. And I'll say the main content that will appear is an animated button. So then if I save that page and go back to the browser, you'll see that nothing appeared to happen. But if I refresh the page, that second line appears. And of course, this doesn't look like a particularly beautiful web page, but bear with me, we can keep going with this. So what I want to do is I want to put that button right below there. So if I go back here, what I'll do is I'll make another break, and I'll make yet another one. So there's a couple of lines there, and there's other ways of doing this. Now, any lines I put here don't really matter. That's just to make it easier to see. So then what I want to do is I want to put together an image. I'm going to do it the wrong way first, just to show you. If I hit the image button here, and this is under the HTML tags. If I hit the image button, you see that it knows where the images are. So I'm going to just put button up. So if I put button up, and notice the background is white, not black, and that's why I did the PNG 32. And so we now create an image tag, which has the angle brackets. And you can see button up PNG, and that's all it is. And so if I do File Save, and I go over to my browser, and I refresh it, suddenly I've got my image. Now that would look a little bit better on the other side of the page because of the way I put the swivel there, but we'll ignore that for now. And so this becomes our button. So if that's all you wanted, then you've got it. And you can do this for your banner. You can make a website banner using 3D graphics. You can make any image that you want for your website. But for now, that's a button, and the button is sorely not working. And so the way it will work is we're going to put a little bit of code in here. Now, fortunately, now you CIT majors, this may not apply to you, but for the communication majors, you can actually do this without writing the code. Now, there are ways you can write the code, but it isn't always going to work. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, first of all, just take this, this image here and delete it. Just make it go away. So, and if I really want to make sure it's gone, I can just save it again, go back here and refresh it, and boom, it's gone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Dreamweaver, and I'm going to put it in, but instead of putting it in as an image, and again, within the Insert HTML Elements in Dreamweaver, I'm going to drag this down until I find the term rollover image. So if I click that, I get this dialog box. And here, it's more complicated than it used to be, but I'm just going to call this button. And it's asking for the original image, and I'm going to choose that one. Now the rollover image will be this one, button over. And alternate text, we don't need to do that, but if we wanted to, we can say animated button. And we can also, while we're here, we can give it a URL. So I could say http://www.methodist.edu. And so look at all that code. And so it made a great deal of code which allows you to do exactly what we want to do. And I'm going to save this. And then I'm just going to go over to here and refresh it. And you see that for all that code, all I get is a button, because all that's behind the scenes. But when I pass my mouse over it, see what happens? It lights up. And if I click on it, I go to Methodist University. How about that? So if I go back here, again, animated button. And so that was done using graphics from Lightwave and using using a simple script from Dreamweaver. Flash used to be made by a company called Macromedia, and now it has been absorbed by Adobe, and Adobe has since stopped supporting the original versions of Flash, and so therefore I speak less and less about it, but I will admire some of the things that they've done. But what I wanted to demonstrate here is some very, very simple ways that you can do animations. Now, I showed you the app that I demonstrated earlier, and you can see that all of the animations, swiping back and forth, that was all done here in Adobe Animate. And so at a certain point, it stops. And so let me show you how that works. If you look at the timeline here, and this is the reason why we're talking about this, this timeline does not work like a video. This timeline works like multimedia. So if you play the timeline, it will only go to where it reaches a stop point. A little bitty button there, a little bitty tiny A, that is a code reference. And so if you go, and we'll keep this window open, if you go to Window and bring up Actions, this is where the code is, and the only thing that you have to know about this one is the word stop. So basically, it will go until it reaches a stop code. And so for that reason, it's not playing like a movie, meaning that even though this is a single frame, this is what the user sees on the screen. And then, I'll close this temporarily, if you play it again, it'll go to this next one and something else will happen and so forth. And so without getting into too much detail there, these buttons are objects that tell that basically tell the object to play. That will basically allow you to scroll through these different things. And if you look at it that way, it's a very simple movie. So what I wanted to demonstrate is how we could hypothetically create a button which would make it go. And so all I will do is basically that. So at this point, I'm going to crank this all the way back to the beginning, to frame 1, where there's automatically a stop code. And I'm going to temporarily put our button on this timeline and see if I can get it to do what this button does. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create something. I'm going to create what's called a symbol. And a symbol is a way of organizing information. So I'm going to go to the Insert area and hit New Symbol. And here we have a few choices. I'm just going to call this New _ button. And I'm going to tell it that I want it to be a button, because that's basically what I want to have happen. And I'm going to do this so that I keep this separate from everything else. So once I do that, the original timeline just disappears altogether. It's still there, but we're not looking at it yet. And then we get this completely empty timeline. So what I want to do is I want to put all of the button elements into here. And so in this project is now a symbol called New Button. So then if I import, and I'm going to import in this case to the stage because it's a little easier to see. And I'm going to take the first button and under the button up button, I'm going to import it there. And I'm basically going to put it exactly where it wants to be on that frame. Now, this is a movie timeline, but it only has 4 frames. The first frame is the upstate. The second frame is the overstate. So I'm going to create a new keyframe there. I'm going to insert a keyframe, and that is going to be the second frame of the movie. So in that keyframe, this is not going to exist, but it will exist here. So in the overstate, I'm going to import to stage the button over image. And I'm going to put it where it lies. And so then, first frame, second frame. Now the third frame, if I insert a keyframe and delete that one, I'm going to import to stage the final frame. And so there we have 3 frames. And so if this movie were playing like a movie, it would look like a Christmas tree blinking. And so I'm then going to go back to the scene and go to my library, and there is my button, and I'm just going to drag the button onto the scene. And so here I can do a modify, and I'm just going to make that smaller because a button wouldn't be that big. So then, if I play this, by hitting Control Return, it will basically craft this for me. Now you'll notice that we can't see the button, and that's because there is a problem with the coding, which is very easy to fix. So if I look at the actual code, I go back to Window, and I go to actions, I can see that on that first frame there is no stop method because I'm asking it to go forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that play and turn it into a stop command. And then if I control return, which will export the animated object, then you can see the button for a few seconds before it pulls up this. And so because I'm not really all that interested in changing this, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to move this object. And so I'm going to put that up where I know I can see it. And then I'm going to try it again. Okay, and so I can't see it perfectly, but there it is. And notice if I click on it, it does its thing. And so all I would have to do is apply the programming to that button to make it the play button instead of the existing play button. And that's basically it. Okay, so why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because I want you to understand that this is the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you can do with multimedia. And I want you to be aware that this can be an important career move for you to understand this. Meaning that you got 3D graphics, you're doing the code if you're a CIT major, or maybe not. Maybe you're working with someone else who's doing the code, but now you know how to apply graphics from here to there. And if you're in the communication major, don't forget that communication is also very closely part of multimedia, and so this is an important skill to have. And I want you to at least consider it.